Hello, students and friends. My name is Chris Wager with the Central Asian Productivity Research Center. Welcome to our 2021 Autumn Lecture Series. At this time, please let me introduce Dr. Paul Prabhaker. He has been in academia for over 30 years. He is a professor of marketing and associate vice president at Northern Illinois University. He is also associate dean at the College of Business, Northern Illinois University. He has a PhD in business administration for marketing and a master's degree in econometrics from the Graduate School of Management, University of Rochester. He is a successful entrepreneur. His startups have done well and created significant value. Recently, he has been serving on several corporate boards for large and small companies. Dr. Prabhaker is a Fulbright specialist. He has served on assignments for the United States government to Macedonia, Kosovo, and Egypt. He has also served on many projects to establish higher educational institutions around the world. He is a world-class researcher, having published over 50 articles in leading journals, and has presented his research in numerous conferences around the world. He has also reviewed over a dozen textbooks in marketing. Dr. Prabhaker has been nominated and listed in Who's Who in the East, 1987, Who's Who in the Advertising, 1990, Who's Who in the World, 1991. We'd like to thank Dr. Prabhaker for taking the time to be with us today. Dr. Prabhaker, if you please.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, friends all over the world. Nice to see you on this YouTube channel. Students, professors, university leaders, and practitioners, I welcome you to this session. I will be speaking to you on a topic that's very frequently addressed in executive MBA programs. However, the reason why we are doing this series of seminars is there's a much wider audience that has been asking for specific details as to business strategy and how to implement business strategy. So I will be with you as your professor over the next several minutes, close to an hour, to share with you some very basic idea of business strategy. So with that in mind, I'd like to frame the discussion that we are going to have. And then I have two short files that I will share with you. And any of you wish to contact me after the seminar, do text the host, Chris Wager, on the YouTube page, and we will respond to that. So essentially, business strategy consists of how an organization interacts with its environment. The organization could be a not-for-profit, obviously could be a for-profit company, could be a small business, a medium-sized or a large corporation, could be an academic institution, could be a nonprofit, could be a government office. So I'm going to be sharing with you strategies that will work across the spectrum for any particular organization. The main thing to keep in mind as we go through the next two sessions, two chapters of this session, is that an organization succeeds or fails based on its ability to interact with its environment. And when I say environment, I mean circumstances. I mean the marketplace. So success and failure, to repeat, is not unilaterally controlled by the organization, which means when we think of strategies and we would want certain outcomes of those strategies, what I'm saying to you is a very fundamental premise, which is the market, the circumstances, have enormous influence over the outcomes of our own strategies. So the clever way to build business strategy is figure out how do we align with the way the market is working and then push through the outcome that we want. So with that in mind, I'm going to show you some visuals. And to help me do that, I'd like to begin by sharing my screen. And you should be able to see my screen now. And let me go on to the first of the two chapters in the session for today. And you should see on the screen the title page for this presentation, which is Advanced Business Strategy with my name, Paul Prabhaker. Again, a more formal welcome to all of you. I'm Paul Prabhaker. I'm in one of the Chicago area universities. I'm a professor, and as the introducer mentioned, I've held various leadership positions in my university. So let's jump right into the content for today. There are three topics I'd like to share with you in the next hour that I have with you. Number one, what are the phases or steps in deploying business strategy? Number two, I'd like to talk to you about the context. Strategy doesn't work in a vacuum. It works in a specific context. You and I don't get to choose that context. So how do we formulate strategy that works in a context? And the third point will be, I will reinforce how powerful the context or the circumstances are when it comes to assigning success and failure to organizational strategy. And I'll try to do this in multiple ways, using words, using pictures, using symbols and visuals and so on as we go along. So the first topic is the different stages of business strategy. There are three very simple stages in business strategy. In theory, the first phase one, which is the first step, is any good strategy always tries to get the organization to do better on performance, better than its competitors, better than the alternatives. So better, faster, cheaper, whether you're selling a product or a service, the push always in strategy in phase one is, how do we improve on what we are doing? Number two, so as an example, we would improve on the quality of the product. We would try to build more customer loyalty, or we will try to strengthen our brand. A number of different ways in which we can try to get better and improve ourselves as an organization. All this comes under the rubric of phase one or step one. Step two, however, this is where things get a little murky. It's not about what we do. It's not about how we try to control our own quality and improvement, but how do we fare relative to our competitors? So step two is about not just ourselves, but step two shows the reality of competition. Whatever we are doing, how do we compare with our competitors? So this relative advantage or disadvantage is called a competitive advantage or competitive disadvantage. Ultimately, having an absolute quality and customer loyalty is immaterial if everybody else is doing better on customer loyalty and product quality. So phase two is saying, don't just naively improve your own capabilities. but do it in a smart way where you improve relative to your competitors. And by doing that, you will establish a gap between your organization and the others who are running in the same race. Step 3 is the most important. We can do things the right way, improve ourselves through product quality and customer loyalty, variety of other measures like brand strength and so on. We can also do the relative advantage, which is the competitive advantage. But at the end of the day, all we've done so far in phases 1 and 2 are spend money. We've created better products, cost money. We've created more customer loyalty, costs money. We've improved our brand strength, costs money, and so on and on and on. So the third and last phase says you have to be street smart. Street smart in the sense, everything we've done by now, we need to learn how to monetize them. So the assets that we've created have to be monetized. If you cannot monetize them, then essentially all we have is a huge bunch of assets that are sitting there that essentially are drinking up the budget and the capital, but not really throwing back any value. So just to quickly review this, phase 1, we've got to be good at what we do. Phase 2, we've got to be better than our competitors. Phase 3, we have to know how to convert that better into bottom line financial rewards or ROI, return on investment. So these are the 3 stages to business strategy. Now let's move on to the next topic. Remember, we had 3 topics to cover in this part of this chapter of the session. The context of business strategy. What is the environment around within which we have to practice business strategy? What are the circumstances that will influence our business strategy? The major significant point that I would like to make before I drill down into the actual context of business strategy is that this economic marketplace, which essentially is the context of our business strategy, it's the universe in which we practice business strategy, is huge, is vast compared to our organization. And I'm going to try to make this point repeatedly in the next couple of minutes, just to drive home that any organization, even the largest global corporations, are minuscule when you compare them to the vastness of the market that they compete in. So here is one visual to communicate the concept of vastness. If you think of the solar system, which itself is a part of the universe, what we call the Earth is a tiny dot in the solar system that's pointed out on this visual. So the Earth is like the organization, thinking that if they do the right things, good things will happen to them. But where they have to be smart is they are part of a much, much bigger, huge, vast universe, which is going to decide on the circumstances that affect things going on this planet Earth. So we should not be naive as children and say, hey, if we do the right things, good things will result. At least in business, the circumstances, the vastness drive the results. Here's another visual to make that same point of vastness. Here is a huge ocean where the ocean is made up of, it's a very calm day, bright sunshine, blue clouds. Those are the circumstances. This tiny sailboat is the organization. So the sailboat is, its business strategy is to navigate its way to a destination. However, that navigation has to happen through the circumstances, through the context that this tiny sailboat does not control. Very calm waters, blue sky, no clouds in the sky, the sun is out, and the strategy of navigation becomes very easy for this tiny sailboat. And yet, where the myopia, the short-sightedness comes in, is this sailboat or this organization should not fall victim to believing that their navigation system is taking them forward. In reality, you can have the same ocean where there's a violent storm, and in the picture that you see on the screen now, you can hardly see where the sailboat is. That tiny sailboat is now at the mercy of these powerful waves and circumstances and conditions that far overwhelm the tiny capabilities of that small boat. I hope you see the parallel here. An organization, no matter how large they are like that small sailboat. So when they concoct strategy, I want to improve my customer loyalty. I want to build a better product. I want to improve my sales. All this has to happen in a vast ocean that we call the marketplace. So the question, the challenge in business strategy is, how do we get to where we want to go? And yet the navigation has to happen through unpredictable circumstances that we as an organization do not control. So to put it more bluntly in words, it is you, the organization, versus the market, which is the circumstances or the context. The box to your left, organization, small, medium, large, for profit, not for profit. You can certainly design your own strategies. You can decide what manufacturing processes you should use. You can decide what materials to use. You can engineer quality into your products. You can put money and create more loyalty in your customers. You can do all that in the red box. But those are all inputs. When it comes to outputs of market strategies, the consequences of strategies, your circumstances, and your market has almost complete control over either rewarding you or punishing you. Going back to that sailboat analogy for one last time, the condition of the ocean at the moment the sailboat is passing through, to a large extent will decide whether the sailboat is able to navigate in a positive way, or it's getting pushed back, or maybe even it's a question of survival for the sailboat, just as it is for a business, whether the market can totally overwhelm you. So I'm dramatizing this point because I want you folks to understand the power of the market, the power of circumstances in deciding on the consequences of your choices. So as we move forward, you make choices. You don't get to choose the outcomes. You make choices. The market decides on the outcomes or the consequences of your choices. It's a very critical lesson, very difficult lesson to accept, that I don't get to choose the consequences of my own choices. But that's reality. So once we accept this premise, we are ready to roll into how do you practice business strategy. So as I said, you control your choices. The market controls the outcomes of those choices. So to wrap up this portion, success in business, much like the sailboat in an ocean or the tiny planet Earth in a violent universe, businesses, those tiny dots, compete in vast economic markets. But there's no guaranteed pathway to success. Success is an outcome. So far what we have established is outcomes are determined by the market, by the circumstances, by the context. The navigation, the plan, the choices, the strategies are concocted by organizations, by individuals. One sidebar here, when I teach this in class, many of my students, adult students and young students, point out the similarity to life in general. You make life choices like I do, but the outcomes of those choices are not guaranteed for us. The circumstances in which we live in at that moment when we make the choices completely decide on the outcomes of the choices we make. So that's just a small sidebar. Business success is in many ways similar to success in life, where we need a recognition that we don't control the outcomes of our choices. And the moment we come to that understanding, our mind gets opened up. It says, we live in a huge universe. We are a tiny cog in this universe, whether we're talking about businesses or individuals. So the best thing we can do is to understand our environment, and that we are not the sole beings in a giant universe. So once we get to the point of understanding as an organization, we are one small dot in a huge universe of organizations. That understanding itself will help us come up with more intelligent strategies. So to wrap it up, who controls phase one, concocting strategy? It's you. It's the company. It's the organization. Who controls the competitive advantage? The second phase. Well, now it's a mixed bag. You control it partly, but the market controls it partly, because there may be others there who happen to be in the right place at the right time, who are in a better position than you are, and they are racing ahead of you. Finally, third and last step, which is essential for the success or failure of strategy, which is called monetization. Who controls that? Unfortunately, the organization has zero control over phase three. How do you monetize strategic advantages? So when you put these three different phases on one slide, on one page, you can see how frustrating business strategy can get. You build strategy, it's a mixed bag, whether you can gain an edge over your competition, and then you're at the mercy of the market completely when it comes to making money. Business myopia. So given this, I want to explain to you how markets actually work in terms of the environment. So let me rephrase this one more time. We are now at a stage in our understanding where we accept that even if we are a large corporation, we are one tiny dot in a universe of organizations. Once we've reached that point of understanding, the next logical question is, how do I understand my environment? See if there are some patterns in which this universe works. Because the whole idea of strategy is, I want to align with the way that my circumstances are working. So along those lines, I want to give you one simple example of how economic markets actually are programmed to work. Economic markets are the universe for organizations. So I'm going to share that with you. So let me start by giving you almost like a narrative. I'll tell this to you as a story. And I leave the screen on for a couple of minutes because the word myopia, short-sightedness, is when we are not able to make that leap from organizational strategy to strategy that has to work within a context, within a universe. Planet Earth by itself, but then how does it survive and flourish within a huge universe? The organization by itself, and how does it succeed within a huge economic marketplace? So how does the economic marketplace works? Is it at random? Is it completely biased one way or the other? Well, let me give you a story, and so you can see for yourself how it works. Economic markets are made up of human beings, employees, customers, regulators, competitors, and so on. So in terms of a story, consider a situation where a crime has been committed. The police arrive at that place, and they look around, collect evidence, interview the local folks who are there, and they round up two suspects, suspect A and suspect B. These are suspects. There's no evidence yet. So the police catch them, they take them to the station, and they lock them up in two different police cells with the idea of bringing them up in front of a judge the next day. But unfortunately, the police need evidence to convict one of these two or both of them. So the police go into suspect A, his room, his cell, and essentially say to that suspect, we think you did this crime. We are going to give you a choice. If you give us all the information on the other person, if you confess and give us all the information, then we will let you off with a very small sentence. The alternative for you is, if you do not confess, do not share your information with us, then you run the risk of being locked up for a long time because the other person is going to be spilling all the information on you. So then the police go to the other cell and repeat the same choices. Remember, human choices and consequences. So suspect B now is faced with the same two choices. Either I confess and give all the information to the police and I walk away with a very light sentence, or I don't confess and I run the risk of being locked up for a long time. So the way human behavior works is, most of the time, each one of these two suspects individually will be so concerned about the outcome that is driven by the circumstance by the other party confessing that each individual individually will confess and share all the information. Okay, not the optimal solution. You know what's the best solution for these two suspects? Neither one of them should be opening their mouths and saying anything to the police, because with no evidence, the police cannot convict them and they will have to let them go. Unfortunately, human behavior doesn't work like that, just like economic markets don't work like that. The ocean doesn't operate like that. The universe doesn't operate like that. So economic markets, the way they work based on human beings is being afraid of what the market can do to us. Based on that, we make choices that are driven by fear. So suspect A will share the information about the other person. Suspect B will share the information about the other person. The outcome is both of them get locked up for a long time, unfortunately. This story that I just shared with you is called Prisoner's Dilemma. Many of you probably know this. It's a very, very commonly used story in economics textbooks to explain that equilibrium, where does the market finally settle? Wherever that equilibrium is, it is not for the best welfare of the individual companies. Okay, so the market circumstances will work in a way very different from what is good for your company or my government or my not-for-profit. So I'm going to put this using a business example and make that point a little bit more clear. So to help me do that, I am going to share a different file here. And like you, this is a very short file, and I'd like you to look at this file, and you will see the situation here is we have two companies, A and B, and we collectively are company A. We have a competitor who's company B. Right now, the situation is both companies have equal market shares of 10%. Both of them sell 1 million units each in the market. And the price of these products are $100. And the cost is $60, which means the profit margin is $40, as you can see up there. And if you make $40 over 1 million products, you make a profit or contribution of 40 million. So company A and company B are similar to suspects A and B. Company A is always worried, what happens if company B gets too greedy, drops the price to grab some of the market share from me? That fear is always in the head. So if you take the camera and move it to company B is also worried, what can company A do if they get greedy and they drop the price to take away some of my profits, my sales, my margins? So this fear of what the competitors could do to my performance will drive me to a choice or a strategy, in this case, a pricing strategy that is not optimal. So both A and B are wondering, should they preemptively drop the price before the other guy does? So let's move fast on this. Here's one scenario where company A, that's our company, decides, you know what, I'm not going to drop the price. But unfortunately for company A, the competitor B drops the price by 5%. So what happens to my market share? My market share goes down to 8%. It was 10. My sales goes down from 1 million to 0.8 million. I haven't dropped the price. The price is the same. The cost is the same. The margin is the same, 40. But since I'm selling fewer units, my total profits or contribution have gone down from 40 million to 32 million. The other scenario where both of them cut price, everything stays the same. They still sell the same 1 million units each. The market share is still 10%, but the price has come from 100 to 95 now because they're both cutting prices. They're both afraid of what the market can do. They both cut it by 5. Profits margins goes from 40 to 35. And my total profit goes from 40 million to 35 million only because of my fear and the fear that the competitor has for me. Let's put all the 4 possible scenarios on one screen that you can see now. And basically, if you look at this screen and ask the question, what's the right thing for these 2 companies involved, for them to gain the most? The right equilibrium or right strategy where they both should coexist is in the upper left, where both hold the price and not give in to the fear of what the market or what the circumstances can do to them. In that case, they will both make $40 million in profit, upper left contribution. Unfortunately, in real life, the market will work its magic called arbitrage. The word arbitrage means pressure. The market breaks down the ability of companies A and B to hold on to this 40 million profit. In this case, it uses fear of competition to break this down. And the equilibrium where both companies will land, will settle, is the lower right, where both of them will cut price to preempt bad things from happening. What are the bad things? Well, A doesn't want the upper right to happen because the profit drops drastically from 40 to 32. B doesn't want the lower left to happen. So both of them cut prices to avoid these extreme bad circumstances, bad outcomes. And they both end up together in the lower right, which means they've given up $5 million in profit just because of the market taking it away. Okay, this is an example of the prisoner's dilemma using real business situations. Now, let's go into the final phase of our talk and talk about what exactly is this market or circumstances that decide on the outcomes of my choices. What is it? It's a ninja individual or competitor. Well, the market, when the word market is being used by economists or by business people, it's really a composite collection of different entities where they're all waiting in line to skim right off the top of any profit that you make. As an example, there's the competitors. The competitors are sitting out there saying, we are watching you, we are waiting, and we will try to grab your customers. And then there is technology, which says anytime the market, the bottom can drop because of what's called disruption that somebody comes up with. And what you took for granted is no longer granted or guaranteed. Larger macroeconomic things like globalization, the political economy will always affect the success or failure of your strategies. How about the ones who gave you the money? Whose money are we playing with in business? Shareholders. If you're a private company, you've taken a loan from a bank. So guess what? Every time I have earnings, profits as a business, the first in line will be whoever owns the money that you're using to run your business. Right off the top, they will skim it. And the same way, as you go down this list of all the characters in this box that we call the market, essentially, we are coming up with a long list of entities that will start taking off layer after layer after layer of the profits that you thought you had made for yourself. After they've all had their take, if there's anything left, that's what you post in your financial statements. As an example, the government regulations. Well, you got to figure out a way to make some money to address the regulations. You got to figure out a way to make some money to pay off the shareholders for allowing you to use their money. You got to figure out a way to address the issue of globalization because you got competitors virtually all over the world. You got to figure out a way to address the competitors who could pull a fast one and come in and grab your customer by having a better product or doing loyalty strategies or having sales promotion, any of their own strategies. So the market is a collection of individuals and organizations and entities that actually work in tandem, even without their own knowledge, of pressuring the tiny red dot that you see in the center, which is you. That's your organization. That's the sailboat. The market is the ocean. So you can see how the odds are stacked against this tiny sailboat or this tiny red dot, unless there is a realization by this organization, we are part of a huge universe called the market. And while we design our strategies, this collection of entities around us will decide on the outcomes of our strategies. To what extent is it successful? What extent is it not? So to take you one step further, last and final topic for the session today, I want to show you how powerful the circumstances are. And since this is a session on business strategy, how powerful business strategy is. So I'm going to give you a short summary. 50, 60 years of history where collectively huge global corporations and small companies together have tried to get to a point from a strategy perspective of saying, I'm improving. I know how this thing works. I finally arrived. I think I can now say I have sustainable success. Anytime you have a little bit of success, the market clamps down through a force that's called arbitrage. It's an economic term, meaning that the market has this property of taking away private individual gains that companies can make. It's a mysterious property. The markets are programmed, I will repeat again, to take away or arbitrage private profits, private success that individual corporations and businesses may happen to be able to make because of their own strategies and successes. Okay, so as long as you're not successful, market is not going to arbitrage you as an organization. This is a paradox. The market arbitrage factors get scaled up, get heated up only when you figure out a way to succeed in the marketplace. And then very soon, the market hits you on the head and says, no, you're not going to keep that. You're not going to sustain that. The house always wins in the long run. So in a few minutes, I'm going to end this session, and I will repeat this at that time. The house always wins in the long run when it comes to business strategy. So isn't that pessimistic? That's not pessimistic, that's realistic. That's the environment that we are given. Those are the cards dealt in our hands. So given that, how do we succeed in business strategy? Well, you realize that you got a short window for your particular set of strategies and circumstances to make your money. And then the market arbitrage hits. You pack up and you move to a different space, which means newer products, newer customers, newer technologies. You repeat the same thing. Okay. What is common across all these circumstances will be market will slap it down anytime you show signs of success that is going to stay. And to give you evidence of that, let me share with you this last set of slides. Way back in the 1960s, businesses learned that, they could gain a strategic advantage if they learn how to manage the cost side of the business. In fact, cost accounting as a science, the way we know it in modern times, was actually born in the 1960s. So in that decade, companies and organizations that had more clarity on the cost side essentially ran away with the race, made much more money than the other companies did. So streamlining of costs, intentionally minimize or eliminate costs, all this came into vogue in the 60s. But once certain companies started realizing success more and more and more, because of this approach, the market clamped down, and before you knew it, everybody was practicing efficient cost management. So if you're asking me, how does the market arbitrage? The market will actually take what you've created as an advantage and will democratize that, will make it available to everybody. When everybody has the same advantage, monetization is zero. Why? Because it's not an advantage for any individual organization anymore. Let me repeat that. Monetization of strategy is possible only when the competitive advantage is uniquely yours. If you're going to share it with everybody else, there is no advantage, there is no competitive advantage, which means the concept of monetizing or making money is a moot point. So the market works by saying to all the others in the market, you better do this if you want to make money. And pretty much before you knew it, cost management was a requirement rather than a competitive advantage. That's why the title, Rise and Fall of Competitive Advantages. Organizations create competitive advantages. The market destroys competitive advantages. This cycle is on and on and on. Let's move to the 70s. The 70s, companies started moving their focus to the marketplace because competition was getting too intense. So the corporations started saying, maybe if we focus on our customers more, maybe if we give them better treatment or give them what they need rather than what we think is the right thing to do, maybe we will have an advantage. So the customer-centric way of doing business was born in the 70s. Marketing as a science was born in the 70s. Customer orientation created a new pathway for business strategy in the 70s. So the few organizations that accepted and ran with this philosophy created a rising competitive advantage. But same old history. When the advantage became monetized, money was being made, the market slapped that down and made this competitive advantage available to everybody else, because everybody else, all other competitors, are looking at the ones that are running away with the race and saying, if you focus on customers, you also can be a part of the leaders. So what happens in a race? Everybody is now in the front of the race. So who's the winner? Well, it's a photo finish, no monetization. So the 70s came, customer focus came in, for a brief period of time was a competitive advantage. Before you knew it, it became a requirement. You better treat the customers well, but don't expect to be paid in dollars for treating them well, because everybody's doing it now. Customer centric, customer is king, customer satisfaction. So 70s come and go. This never-ending search for a sustainable competitive advantage is still ongoing, because organizations believe there's something out there that will not be arbitraged. So the 80s came, that's when the focus shifted away from the market, which became a requirement now, into the internals of an organization. How do we put processes within organizations? No more ad hoc manual ways of doing business. How do we engineer quality? The concept of the Japanese total quality management came in the 80s. Computerization was just beginning at that time, and the concept of re-engineering was born. Everything to do with making the organization a much more scientific, sophisticated machine was the competitive advantage in the 80s. So again, the same story, but I'll say it a little bit more quickly this time. The few organizations that acknowledged and embraced the management of organizations were racing ahead of the rest of them. And when the market saw that these few organizations were able to monetize because of this competitive advantage, arbitrage kicked in. How did it kick in? All others who are left behind started looking around and saying, we got to do the same thing. We got to follow the same principle, the same magic potion, management of organization, the same competitive advantage. So when everybody started adopting and following the same principles, what was a competitive advantage becomes a market expectation. You better have a lean organization. You better have an efficient organization. You better have really good systematic quality processes, but don't expect to monetize them because everybody has them. So the 80s came and went. In the 90s, the concept of supply chains were born. Organizations figured out you can de-link manufacturing from the customer locations and actually work on the chain independently. So streamlining and automating supply chains was the name of the game in the 90s. And networking technology slowly started coming in the 90s. So the 90s was an age of networking, and which means moving from an organization to an enterprise. And it was a time of streamlining supply chains. Same old story. The few organizations that initially adopted these practices ran away with the competitive advantage, monetized them, made lots of money. The market slapped that down, made this concept available to everybody else. So as more and more competitors started mimicking the formula of success in the 1990s, the ability to monetize gradually diminished from huge, significant down to zero, became a market expectation. You better have a streamlined supply chain. You better leverage networking capabilities. Don't expect to get paid for it. 1990s came and went. Then the year 2000s, the decade of the new millennia, 2000s was born. It's called the digital age, when anything and everything was being turned into bits and bytes. Websites were created. Whatever part of your business could be digitized, meaning represented in its digital form rather than its real form, that had to be done. So organizations were actually being separated into, here's your digital face, here's your analog physical reality. So organizations realized in this decade that you need to play the game along two realities, a digital space and a physical reality space. And the fuel for the digital age obviously was the information, enormous volumes of information being collected, organized, and made available for access to the organizations. So the few organizations that realized that the magic portion of the day was information ran away with the race in the 2000s. They harnessed information, they leveraged information, and they played that game very well. And they made lots of money. Once the other competitors saw this happening, they had to ramp up and catch up with the leaders. When that happens, the ability to monetize this competitive advantage goes from extremely high down to zero. So today, the ability to leverage information is not a competitive advantage. It's a market expectation. You better do this, otherwise you'll be left behind, but don't expect to monetize it. So the second decade in this millennium is called the knowledge economy. Some people refer to this as the big data, and companies, when they fall into circumstances that they believe is the holy grail, is the one sustainable competitive advantage that the market cannot arbitrage, unfortunately, the history speaks against it. So big data has been the name of the game most recently. If only you can drill deep enough and get more knowledge and information about customers, about processes, about organizations, you'll be way ahead of the game. Sure enough, the companies that did this, that played this game, the big data game, data analytics game well, ran away with the race. And they started monetizing the advantage. They made huge amounts of money. But sure enough, history repeats itself. When other companies were slow to accept this, saw what was going on, they had to very quickly ramp up and retool themselves to use this concept of big data and data analytics in their strategic arsenal. To the extent that now we are at the tail end of the second decade, we are actually past that. So we are now at a point where the ability to monetize having tools like this is almost being completely arbitraged, but we don't have a choice as organizations. We have to employ these tools. We have to spend money on them. We have to stop expecting huge rewards for doing these. So even as we look into the future, the 2020s, the third decade, big question mark. What's going to be the magic potion of this decade? I don't know. Could be artificial intelligence. Some people say this, some people say that. The grand scheme of things, whatever it is, it really doesn't matter. Remember what I've told you. The gains, the spoils are to those who will leverage competitive advantage early, when it's still new, when it's still risky, because that's when they will be able to monetize the competitive advantage to the maximum. If they keep waiting and waiting and waiting for the clouds to clear, more and more competitors are jumping on the bandwagon, which means it gets easier to use these tools and magic potions, but the ability to monetize those competitive advantages decrease exponentially. And if we keep waiting even more, it's almost hitting zero, because these competitive advantages become market expectations. Folks, this is the end of the session. Hopefully, I've given you some insight into what business strategy is. My intention wasn't to give you tactical tools of how to make a small win here or there. My intention was to make you a more intelligent, more aware business person, and to shed some light on the circumstances that drive the outcomes of your choices. So let me say this one last time. Circumstances control your ability to monetize competitive advantage. You control what strategies to deploy in the marketplace. Hopefully, the strategies will lead to a competitive advantage. But beyond that, the market will decide quickly what kind of consequences your strategies will result in. So if there's one overarching advice or suggestion I can give you, jump on the bandwagon early, even when there is more risk, because your competitive advantage can be monetized much more easily when you're one of the few that's deploying that particular generation's advantage. And you will see that this cycle keeps playing out repeatedly, indefinitely into the future. I wish you all luck, even as you lead your companies, as your organizations, and you know how to reach me. You can send a message on YouTube, and my staff who are manning the YouTube will send me your message. I'll be more than glad to connect with you and give you further guidance.